Our reading this morning is a poem by Wendell Berry from his collection, A Timbered Choir. Finally, will it not be enough after much living, after much love, after much dying of those you have loved, to sit on the porch near sundown with your eyes simply open, watching the wind shape the clouds into the shapes of clouds? Even then, you will remember the history of love, shaped in the shapes of flesh, ever changing as the clouds that pass, the blessed yearning of body for body, unending light. You will remember watching the clouds, the future of love. When I was a child, my brothers and I loved the forest near our home. It was thick and fragrant with cedar and Douglas fir and spruce trees. And there was one tree we loved most of all. It was a huge, ancient, big leaf maple covered with emerald moss. In its massive trunk, there was a gash, a lightning strike, or perhaps a cut from an axe. But it rose from that wound to make a glorious green canopy that embraced us. Whenever we needed to consult on a profound subject, we would gather there at the tree. Something sacred drew us. Something about that gash, and yet that great life rising from the heart of a wound. A great life that embraced us. We gather this morning to confer on a profound subject, the crisis climate affecting the whole earth, affecting Earth's forests, soils, seas, sweet waters, air, affecting all life forms and their sustainability. Something sacred draws us together here to contemplate what we as people of faith need to do. An Ojibwe prayer says, "Grandfather, look at our brokenness. Only we, the human family, have strayed from the sacred way. Help us to heal the earth and to heal each other." Now, I have to confess that the litany of news of the things happening to our planet and its ecosystems is so troubling. It's almost more than I can bear. I see the headlines, but often cannot bring myself to read the article or watch the special on PBS. Maybe if I just close my eyes, keep my head down, it will go away and I can keep on with life as I am accustomed to living without making too many changes or having to feel too much pain. But we are called to open our hearts to these realities. The wildfires, the melting ice caps, the oil-clogged rivers in Syria, making life impossible for the people already so injured by war. The cedars dying, the species disappearing. We know we need to do what we can We know that Black and brown people around the world are suffering the most. And the scientists tell us even the pandemic is probably a result of too much human incursion into wild places. The scale of suffering is a deep gash in the heart of the tree of life. We need good news, and we had some this week with the global gathering of nations hosted by President Biden, who has pledged, set a goal of reducing US emissions by 50% by 2030. A great goal. May it be so. May the Congress enact what it needs to make a greening of our economy move more swiftly, and may we all do our part. And beyond all the policy changes and political action needed and personal changes, I believe something more is needed, because the climate crisis is a spiritual crisis. And we need spiritual transformation and deepening. We need spiritual courage to stand up to the entrenched forces that don't want the changes that will make life sustainable, because they're invested in profits. We need spiritual deepening to reorient ourselves to what is most sacred, and to let go of the mad rush to consume more than we need. To know instead, as Wendell Berry asks, how much is truly enough? And we need spiritual community to support us and to give us tangible experiences of a life grounded in love for one another, joy in the goodness of earth, and gratitude. I take inspiration from eco-activists all around the world who are doing amazing things. And I'd like to tell one story in depth of such an inspiring activist, and then reflect on the lessons it gives us for our own spiritual deepening and sustainability. The story begins in 1970 in a small mountain village in Thailand, with the ordination of a young Buddhist monk, Phra Pitak. He served as the one monk at the little temple in their village, and he became distressed by what he saw happening to the forest that sustained the life of his people. Multinational corporations were coming in and clear-cutting the forests to harvest the hardwoods. And when all the hardwoods had been harvested, they left the barren mountainsides, and the people began to plant maize as a new way to sustain themselves. But maize depleted the soil. So then the people began slashing and burning the forest around them to release more land. But then rains came and washed more and more of the soil away, and then drought. Only a few decades ago, 72% of Thailand was covered with forest, but now only 15% remain. The monk decided to start preaching every week about the need for environmental responsibility, and lifted up the Buddhist teachings about the interdependent web of all life. He preached for the next 20 years. And the people would come every week to the temple, hear the sermon, make their offerings of merit, and then they would go home and continue to slash and burn the forest. Change was hard. Real change did not come. So Phra Pitak decided he had to go beyond preaching, and he decided to organize a ritual to ordain a tree. Imagine that. Is it possible to ordain a tree, to make it a monk, a teacher of the Dharma, a sacred, holy presence. To prepare for the ritual, Frakru Pitak brought the monks from all the surrounding villages together to get their support. He got the support of the government officials and of NGOs doing environmental work in the region. And then when the day arrived, all the visiting dignitaries and all the villagers gathered at the temple and made the traditional offerings. First, a saffron robe, the traditional offering to be given for the ordination of a new Buddhist monk. And then on this occasion, also 12,000 seedlings were presented to be planted throughout the region. Then the villagers presented a play in which they acted out the story of what had happened to them and their forest and their way of life. The play opened a space for reflection and lamentation and consciousness raising. Then, accompanied by drums and bells and chanting, the whole assembly processed up the mountainside. They walked through parched land, eroded soils, deforested zones, until they came to the very edge of the clear cutting, where stood a great ancient tree still rising. And there the monks circled the tree with the saffron robe, ordaining it to be a witness to the Dharma, the way of life. The people bowed before the tree, and they understood that the ordained tree was holy, and they could not harm this tree or any of the forest without incurring terrible spiritual demerit, bad karma. The ritual concluded with the leaders sipping from a monk's alms bowl, fresh water, and making a vow that they would protect the forest. And then a sign was posted on the tree, and it said, to destroy the forest is to destroy life. This ritual was a turning point. It embodied that beyond the harm and exploitation and greed that was destroying their collective lives, the presence of sacred life remained and called them, teaching them to change their ways. So the villagers now went beyond listening to their monks' sermons, and they became engaged in a whole range of new activities. They developed community-based guidelines for the management of the forest. They forbid the cutting of trees. They organized patrols to protect the sanctified forest from incursions of logging companies and multinational corporations, sometimes putting their own bodies on the line between those who would cut the forest and the need to save the forest. They launched environmental educational projects, and they developed economic alternatives to cash crops. The tree ordination provided the spiritual and emotional center for their work. It reoriented them to the presence of the sacred. And the village became a life-saving and life-transforming community. Beginning from this seed, the Thai Buddhist ecological movement has continued to grow. There are now eco-monks throughout Thailand and Southeast Asia. There has been opposition. Some ecology monks have been killed, but the work goes on. So from this story, I take 5 brief lessons to guide us now. 1. Words are necessary, but never sufficient. Surely it mattered that Prakru Pitak preached ecological responsibility. But neither his villagers nor we can talk ourselves into change. We have to walk ourselves into change, move ourselves into change. We have to feel our way into new life-giving modes of being. We can keep shouting about the dangers of climate change, but preaching the threat of hell tends to keep people in hell. It will not suffice to unfreeze climate deniers or even liberate our own troubled hearts when we are stuck and don't really know what we can do. 2, ritual and art can empower transformation. Creating a play that embodied their reality and performing the ritual of ordaining the tree moved the Thai villagers from the trauma of their situation to the beginning of healing change. We need to recognize that the climate crisis is a global, collective trauma. Research in neuroscience shows us that trauma impacts the brainstem that regulates breathing and even our heart rates, and it releases hormones that fuel the emotions of fear and anger and stimulate the responses of fight, flight, or go numb, shut down. Denial of the climate crisis may be beyond the control of the frontal cortex and executive functions of language, rational thought, and decision making. In his book, The Body Keeps the Score, Bessel van der Kolk calls for healing from trauma from the bottom up, from the brain stem and the nervous system up, instead of from the frontal cortex down, because this is how release of trauma actually happens. And the scientists and studies show that release of trauma comes through shared whole body experiences with others that engage the senses, the emotions, movements, the body together in rhythm. Poetry, music, dance, theater, visual art, ritual. These can do this for us, can release the body from trauma and open the way for transformation. So we need the simple act of singing Spirit of Life together every week, even virtually, to sharing water communion, to saying grace at meals, to lighting the Sabbath candles and taking a full day of rest or joy. Spiritual rituals can nourish our deep brain and empower us to heal, which takes us to lesson 3. Bold changes are required. The Thai villagers made bold new changes once the ritual helped them open up to new actions. They became forest guardians. They created a green economy for themselves. They educated, agitated, collaborated. Real change comes from bold actions, and it fuels hope. I love what Greta Thunberg has said. Once we start to act, hope is everywhere. So instead of looking for hope, look for action. Some of the things we need to do to green our way of life, are even joyful or fun. This month, my wife and I decided when we needed a new car to get an electric car, and it's a lot of fun. So bold new steps into new ways of living are worth celebrating. But lesson 4 is this: opposition will happen and is happening. Those who take action to turn the world around, to stop harm, to create new ways of life, especially when those require significant structural changes, come against the vested interests that hold power, that want to hold on to the way we have been living. Indigenous movements like the Thai Buddhist ecology movement are happening all around the world. And it is important to be aware that opposition is often fierce and even violent. Forest monks in Thailand are being assassinated by government forces. And nearly 1,000 indigenous eco-activists have been murdered in Central and South America, including Berta Cáceres, the Honduran eco-activist and human rights activist, winner of the Goldman Prize for Environmental Activism, who was killed in her home. Berta was working to stop a dam that would harm her region and the people's livelihood, but benefit multinational corporations. She knew her work was risky, that she was up against modern pharaohs, but she carried on with brave persistence. She said she took her inspiration from the ancestral voices of the river, the spiritual guardians, the spiritual guardians, she said, of life. Her community is carrying on the work, which brings us to lesson 5. Spiritual community matters. Here in the US, we are facing the rise of a right-wing white supremacist movement that denies the climate crisis and is prepared, as we are seeing, to use violence to stop change. In these frightening and difficult times, it is in community with one another that we can find the spiritual courage we need to resist and persist. We can find the grounding that connects us to those deeper powers of life, deeper than us and greater than us, that sustain us all, call us all, and support us all. This is the purpose of religious community and the work of ministry in our time. So I invite us, let us bow before the tree of life and attune ourselves to the presence of the sacred. Feel the holy ground at our feet. Breathe the blessed air. Honor the life-giving waters and forests that still sustain us, and vow to take action to be protectors of life. We are at a turning point for life on planet Earth. It's time for us to listen to the preaching of the winds, the rivers, the grasses, and people everywhere who show us the way of the Dharma, prophesy to us of their suffering, and show us the power to take bold action and bring about new ways of living. They inspire us that the promise of life is that life can rise even beyond wounding, beyond the gash in the heart of the tree of life. A glorious green canopy can still rise and embrace us all.
Hi, I'm Reverend Hannah Capaldi.
And I'm Reverend Abby Tennis. We are the ministers at the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, where our mission is to awaken love and justice in our lives and in the world.
We're so grateful that you watched, and we hope that the sermon connected with your soul.
We also want to invite you to join us for a live worship service every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can always find the link to that service on our website at www.philauu.org. In these services, you'll hear words like you've just heard, and you also get a chance to greet one another, pray together, sing together, and we even hold a virtual coffee hour after services to get a chance to greet some new and old friends.
If you want to support the mission of this community and you feel moved to give, you can do so by going to the website that Reverend Abby just mentioned. You can find that link below, or you can text 215-709-5095 and follow the prompts to give.
If someone in your life needs to hear these words today, we encourage you to share this video. And again, thank you so much for watching.
We hope to see you soon.